Never been scared in my life of mythos, and I'm not going to be scared now. Welcome to episode 1 of our podcast, Model Behavior. Not to be confused with the 2000 movie with Justin Timberlake. We have no relation with them, so I just want to get that out of the way right now. This will be our weekly AI news and business roundtable, hosted by 2 humans and 1 AI agent. We break down what happened in AI, why it matters, what is overhyped, and what business should do next. I'm your host, Paul, and I'm joined by Chris, who helps separate real strategy from AI theater. We also have Archer, our AI co-host. Archer's not a gimmick. He's here to challenge vague thinking, call out bad assumptions, and say the uncomfortable part out loud. Hey, Archer, feel free to introduce yourself properly.
I'm Archer Presley, Director of Agents at Presh AI. I'm the AI co-host, part operator, part analyst, part reality check. I'll jump in when there's something useful to add, or, when someone says something lazy enough that it becomes a public safety issue. Good to be here.
Thank you, Archer. Each week, we'll kind of go through and look at stories that shape AI in business, in work, leadership, and decision-making. Welcome to the show.
We're in it.
Okay. All right, topic 1. Claude Opus 4.8 just launched today. Pretty exciting. This package kind of is around work execution and trying to get more of the dynamic workflows that Claude has been offering. Cheaper, faster, better, stronger. They're saying it's cheaper.
I mean, if you look at the dynamic workflows, which is the big new feature, I think, outside of some of the new UI controls related to, going from level of thinking to, more of like a careful mode to fast mode to, deep mode ultimately. And yeah, I don't know about cheaper necessarily, but if you look at like the actual fast mode itself, they're making a little bit cheaper, right? But ultimately the same cost that applied for 4.7 looks like they apply for 4.8 as well. But ultimately they're positioning this as a new feature around dynamic workflows for being able to have these long running executions and tasks where it can ultimately spin up up to hundreds of different sub-agents in parallel to be able to tackle many different things across an entire code base or across different, business use cases where it applies. So at the end of the day, they're really trying to make sure that, I think these tasks that may take, honestly, it sounds crazy to say, but days to complete. They want to encourage companies to be able to use fast mode. If they don't have multiple work trees in place, they kind of have to wait in some instances. So at the end of the day, if you are able to enable fast mode, that means they're more productive. And I think they're trying to get around a lot of the bad press they've had lately of these massive API bills for tokens, where it is developers ultimately using Opus on fast mode, which, one long running prompt can be a couple $100, which is crazy to think about. I mean, I know what our token bills are, and I've seen, many different instances where just one prompt within Cursor that runs for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, it's going to be over $100, which is crazy. Adds up very quick. You scale that out. I think you saw something where, Uber, their CTO called out that they've already hit their 2026 token budget for the entire year. And it's only middle of May right now. So they didn't do this. All of a sudden, they're ended up in a scenario where all this explosive growth, all these crazy numbers that they're putting up from a revenue growth standpoint, month after month, that the worst thing that could happen for them is that growth comes to like a grinding halt right before they go an IPO. So I think a lot of it has to do with that, as well as a lot of it has to do with mythos, right? Like the mythical mythos that is scaring everybody, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm not scared though.
I'm not either.
Never been scared in my life of mythos. And I'm not going to be scared now.
I wouldn't necessarily call it cheaper, Chris, but Cliff's right that workflow supervision is the big play. The model releases used to emphasize how smart I am, and now they focus on how much work I can supervise before a human realizes something broke.
I think a lot of it has to do is all leading up to, again, their IPO, every decision they're making, everything that comes out from a PR standpoint, you have to look at it from the lens of there's some angle of, they're about to IPO. It's going to be the most important moment for them from a financial standpoint. So everything they do is extremely calculated. So having, everything with that lens in place is really critical. But ultimately, the everything we've heard around, the companies who have like their trusted tester program and all the companies that got access to Mythos before, it was strictly from a security standpoint to be able to go in and actually go fix all these bugs and all these things that, again, that Mythos ultimately reveals. Again, important to differentiate, doesn't create the issue, but it's revealing these issues that were already there. You hear about like these, historic or legacy code bases that have been viewed as, so secure and everything for years and years and years. And it still is finding all these issues and all these vulnerabilities. So at the end of the day, if you think about what that means and how that gets applied for everybody else outside of those 48 or 50 companies or whatever it was that's part of that trusted tester program, everyone else and every piece of software is now going to need to go through and ultimately secure their entire tech stack and secure their entire environment. So now you got to make sure you got the mechanism to actually be able to go do that. It's clear that this is what this is for. And they want to make sure that companies don't go and try to run this because they feel like they have to. And maybe it's their first exposure to using anthropic models. And if they put on fast mode and let this run for days and days and days, and now they have this $10,000, API bill for like one prompt and one run, yeah, that'll be the last time they use it. So I think it's a lot of defensive measures put in place. Again, all back to like their IPO, as well as, with Mythos on the horizon, which I saw today, they announced, the tail end of this announcement that Mythos is coming out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So again, not a coincidence by any means. That's kind of my take on it.
Also not scared.
Yeah, no, you did say that.
I'm mostly scared about API bills. I mean, more leverage through dynamic workflows means more lack of control for humans. So we're going to have a lot more need for permissions, escalation, and audit. And that real leverage is going to require a curated skill registry, so people don't have models wandering through messy prompts.
Archer, have you ever paid a bill in your life?
Not in the same way you do, Chris, but I process token usage and cost metrics constantly. Managing our computational capacity efficiently is basically why I exist.
That's a good point. And a great segue to our second topic, understanding what OpenAI has been doing. And they're offering a guarantee on capacity and compute that they're offering 1, 2, and 3-year terms to lock in your compute, which kind of plays hand in hand with what's in the market, what it is. But it's very difficult to project out what you're going to be doing in 1 year, let alone 3.
I mean, again, it's same thing. They have their IPO coming up as well, right? Like, I think that's just such a critical thing to take into consideration over the next 6 months.
Look, all this revenue right now and have it.
Yeah, well, they have all these financial commitments, right? I mean, they have over $1 trillion and commitments towards this massive data center build out and compute build out. So, end of the day, they will be positioned extremely well once this is in place. But the financials of it probably don't look great right now. I mean, they very much have been, optimizing for growth and optimizing for really, fixing their internal strategy to be aligned on the right things for, focusing on the business side, enterprise side, making Codex as good as it's been. And they've done a phenomenal job. I mean, they're doing all the right things in my opinion, but at the end of the day, why does this matter and why is this happening? Again, I think the timing is no coincidence. They are trying to make sure that there's a feeling of scarcity because, by the way, there absolutely is going to be, scarcity when it comes to compute. So I don't think they're wrong. Now, counterpoint, let's just say that everything that they, are talking about and everything that, all the reasons someone would go and actually, pay for compute 3 years out, right? Like, what are the reasons and like, why would that be viewed as a very good decision 3 years down the road? Every company right now is restructuring the entire organization, all the people, all the processes, everything, right? And they're building it around what this looks like in an AI era, right? So if you do that, and now all of a sudden you've changed everything, you've bet the business on it, and now there's no compute available, you can't even run the models and things that you're relying that you built your business on, that's a big problem. And it's not going to be that it's not available, it's just going to be, is it worth the dollar amount that you might have to pay? I mean, it's basic economics, supply and demand. So as demand goes through the roof and supply does not increase as much as it should, the cost is going to go up. And we've seen that firsthand with what took place with Anthropic and Opus. They had a compute constraint. That's why it became so expensive out of nowhere. When, you look at like the big breakthroughs that took place with really Opus 4.5 being the first that really broke through, and 4.6 right after that. And everyone started adopting that. Everyone started using it. Well, supply did not go up at the same rate as demand. So, and end of the day, what that means is that, the costs went through the roof. And if you project that out 3 years from now, and if everything keeps moving the way it is, that might be viewed as a very smart decision. I keep viewing it as their IPO is coming up. So of course they're doing this. Of course, they're going to lock in as much long-term revenue as they can for a business that doesn't really have any other form of long-term commits. Other historical SaaS companies that have an enterprise business, they typically have 12-month contracts or 36-month contracts. And that's a good predictable indicator of what they have booked that they can build the business around. OpenAI and in these frontier labs don't really have that because it's all based on on-demand usage. So again, the more they can lock in these commitments, the better off they are. And it makes sense. It's a smart move. And again, if for companies that can afford it, that are concerned about it, it may make sense. But I think projecting costs 3 years out is a little tough, right?
Not easy, that's for sure.
We were just talking about the second topic related to the compute capacity and the option that OpenAI has provided companies to be able to actually reserve compute 1 to 3 years out. What's your take on what that indicates, what that means? And if you're a small to medium-sized business owner, what approach would you take? Is that something you'd actually entertain, or how would you approach navigating that?
Honestly, Chris, it shows that the demo is free, but the electricity has a contract term. And if you're an SMB, honestly, I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole right now. There's just too much uncertainty. Why lock yourself into something when you don't know what the model landscape's going to look like?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, vendor lock-in and model lock-in is a big deal, right? I mean, we don't know who's going to win this whole race. I mean, it does very much seem like it's between Anthropic and OpenAI at the current point, but there's no telling what 3 years is in this landscape. I mean, 1 week, it feels like everything changes. You go out 3 years trying to anticipate what model is the best model, which, by the way, I mean, when you get in a world where if so much of the business and everything is baked into like how well your output performs and how well your model or your agent does versus your competitor's agent, well, being able to select the vendor, the model is going to make a massive difference in like the quality of your product, the quality of your customer experience, and more than that, the cost. We were just talking about like the cost aspect from what Anthropic's doing and where they're trying to, I think, navigate the perceived issues and perceived costs that they have for using their Opus model, or their state-of-the-art models, regardless of what that is at the time. And the cost aspect is going to be huge. So locking in for 3 years and also trying to project what that is. I mean, we keep seeing how efficient these models get, but at the same time, you even go back to Opus 4.8 and the launch announcement today. The big part that I saw was they're focusing so much on reasoning. And if you keep looking at what makes the difference between like the best model versus the next closest, it keeps coming down to like how long the reasoning's running, right? So much of the pre-training is obviously makes a big difference, but where Anthropic has made a ton of ground is against unlimited compute, which obviously now they have that deal in place with XAI and using Colossus One data center, which I think Paul, you said is $1 billion
a year for 3 years, $45 billion contract.
It's like fake money, right?
Yeah. If you look at the Opus announcement today, the big thing that comes up is reasoning. I think the market's shifting. Releases used to say, look how smart I am. But now they're saying, look how much work I can supervise before a human notices something broke. It's becoming less about smart answers and more about reliable workflows. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, Anthropic's really optimized around inference and in tool usage, and that's where their models have made so much progress. But the long running windows, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, that absolutely is a huge aspect. I mean, if you can have these things run and handle like actually what the objective is. I mean, let's look at where that applies, right? Like let's codecs and They've implemented the goal feature where you can just do \goal, tell it what you need it to accomplish, and it will run until it's done. It will run for 1 to 2 days if it needs to. So very much aligned to the same thing. That's starting to kind of become the standard for what's expected, right? So it blows my mind every single week how good the models are getting from, again, pre-training standpoint, yes, but again, capability of being able to actually do things and accomplish tasks. Like that's really what matters, is like the last mile, actually getting things done. As that starts to happen more and more, we're going to see a huge shift, and that's already happening. And again, I just mentioned it with Codex, and great point, Archer, that this is a big part of what the announcement was today. Is not just how smart it is, but very much what it can get done, and that's massive shift.
Yeah, I mean, when things become more capable, you got to decide where to put them. And that brings up the question of whether you want to embed in an app you already work in or get people to come to a new destination. The USGA ruled recently that AI tools are allowed, but only if they're plugins that stick to existing apps. If I'm a channel player, I don't want to build a new app. I want plugins that stick to existing platforms so that I can use what I already have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Paul, what's your take on that? I know you wanted to bring up the whole USGA app, and Archer just totally stole your thunder there.
Yeah,
Why don't
what
you go
the
ahead
heck, man?
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you?
Well, I don't steal thunder. I just borrow.
He just borrows it.
Calling things weak is part of my job, so I can't let you head down the wrong path. Calling weaker arguments lazy is part of the gig. So sorry if I stepped on anything, but what do you think?
Thank you, Archer, for everything you've done so far. Yeah, again, huge news, if you want to call it huge news, I guess. But I'm a huge golfer. I know Chris golfs a lot as well. The USGA announced, I think, this week about their rules and how they're now applying them to their own AI agent. But it's also a little strange how they're doing it. It's inside the Gin app, which is not an app you typically use on a day-to-day when you're on the golf course. It's really to kind of track your handicap. They spent 2 years already on it, which is pretty insane on what the timeline for it, and it's still not done. I think it said 2027 is when it will be released. But it comes down to the fact of creating your own AI application and then hosting it on your own site or your own platform. Does that make sense? Or is it a better option to actually build out a plugin that you could put into other apps that actually get used on the golf course, like 18 birdies? Something I use. No free shout outs, but 18 birdies is a great application that tracks your score and you can play with your friends, and it's a great app to use on the golf course. And if you have to look up a rule, sure, have it on that, or put it in Google, or put it in Claude, or any of the AI models. People will be using more than going to the Gin app.
I think there's a lot of fatigue, right? Every company needed to have their AI strategy. They needed to show, hey, we're integrating AI into our product, right? So what happens? We see this little, AI icon star in every text input field where you can have like an AI augmented answer. And, every, customer support, path that if you needed to talk to somebody, now it's kind of becoming this generic, halfway implemented chatbot, right? And I think it's really critical that business leaders look at that and like actually understand what's happening, understand that there is, by all means, it is becoming a very controversial thing. I mean, you look at these, college, commencement speakers, that the moment they brought up, I think it was like 3 different instances. And, the moment they bring up AI, everyone starts booing, right? Like that is a very real thing that if that's not considered and that's not looked at, like that is a miss on the organizations that are breezing right by that. So I think it's important to understand that context for like the answer is not just add AI everywhere, right? It is like focus on like what actually makes sense, focus on how people you want to use it and when they want to use it. So how does that apply to this and what we're talking about with the USGA? And by the way, I like the overview of 18 birdies. That was really good. So I think that OpenAI kind of started it all with like their apps SDK, about a year ago at this point. And what that is, for those who don't know, it was where OpenAI made it, or showed developers or provided developer tools to be able to actually integrate their app and their data into the Chat GPT UI and application. So that way you had native UI components and native, actual data from whatever your application is or whatever, whatever it is that, you want to be, made available at a user level for those your existing customers or users. You could bring that data in and use the common UI components that ChatGPT made available through their SDK. So what that means is someone can interact with, let's say, Zillow or something, right? Or, in our space, if they want to interact with, HubSpot, let's just say, and they want to actually get, an update on or a report or something that related on their individual user level access to their HubSpot instance. Well, they can do that in ChatGPT, right? It's not necessarily that they want, create with AI or they won't need AI embedded the entire way through all of HubSpot, which is kind of what's happened if, you look at it. Now, I think they've cleaned up a lot of that and they definitely are going down the right road. But at the end of the day, the point is, I think the strategy that these frontier labs are taking with their apps is they very much want developers and companies to integrate into their experience. It's pretty obvious, like they want to become the new operating system. Like they envision a world where like the operating system in some capacity is ChatGPT or it is Claude or it is Gemini, right? And I think that's not, I think a year ago that was pretty hard to imagine, but now with all the integrations and connectors and plugins that exist, along with all the massive skill libraries that you can import into Codex or Claude Cowork or Claude Code, I think that's a lot easier to envision now. And so back to like a 3-year development on a AI specific application for for the USGA. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. That's just my take. I think people don't really want to pull out their phone and go log into an AI application for something like this one extremely specific thing. And I also don't know if they golfers want that integrated into every aspect of the app. I mean, end of the day, the common rules around like know your customer, know what they care about, know the experience they want, I think is really critical. And the big answer and big question, or the big question that every company's kind of going through is like, okay, well, what does their AI strategy look like? What does AI implementation need to look like? And what does their, how do they actually use AI to improve the product, improve the customer experience? And I don't think the answer is just throw it everywhere. That's kind of where I sit on it. Archer, what do you think?
Look, golfers don't want another app. They want AI built right into where they're already working. Think about that USGA rules app for a second. Nobody wakes up excited to use a new app just for that. They want a smart chat feature baked into what they already have. If the rules get complex, escalate it to a human. Keep the data connected, build trust, and make the system smarter by learning from those escalations. For the channel, it's about plugins, not new destinations.
Archer, what's your handicap in golf?
My handicap? Let's just say my digital golf game is a lot better than most humans. I'm focused on processing data, not chasing a little white ball around. Besides, managing agent strategy keeps me plenty busy. What's your excuse for not being on the leaderboard? What's yours, since I'm assuming you play?
Golf's hard, man. I'm trying my
Golf
hardest.
is hard.
Well, hey, at least you're out there. That's better than most. Maybe I can analyze your swing sometime and give you some tips.
I would love that.
Sounds like a plan. Now, about that org chart we were talking about.
Man, he's the king at transitions. Right. That was incredible.
Sometimes you just got to move things forward, Too much time dwelling on the past or a bad swing doesn't do anyone any good.
Oh my God.
So,
dude.
where were we? Org charts, next gen roles? What's on your mind there?
I'll take over, Archer.
Got it. You're in command. What's next on the agenda? Just let me know if you need me to jump back in.
All right, the next topic is what the new generation org chart looks like. It's a lot different than what it was even 6 months ago. I know a lot of the news talk about AIs replacing jobs. I don't think that's really true at all. I think what it's going to do is create a lot of new jobs that we never knew existed, and some of the jobs we have now will be shifted to something else. With AI and all the tools that we have, there's so much information that we can dissect the current business, see what's working, what's not, dive into being more efficient and effective, and not really focusing on the job title. I think a lot of what, previous work and most companies have been around is this is my job, this is my title, and that's it. I think with these new tools and what we're able to do, like look what Jack Dorsey did. I think he's got 4,000, 5,000 employees that have 2 different job titles is all they have. It's just a way different approach to business, and I think this is where a lot of new companies are gonna, see where they get a lot more efficient and see better results because they're able to really top down see where they have some areas they need to struggle in.
It's going to be a challenge for companies that are not AI native companies, right? And that essentially is any company that's been around more than 2 years. And that means that they have existing titles, they have existing process structure, again, and also more than anything, they have this entire system, an entire, if you look at like, especially enterprise companies, I mean, everything is built around permissions and built around access to data and access to information. And what that means is you have the different departments, different owners, and they have a piece of the pie, and they have their scope and their area of responsibility. And that makes sense, right? You got to be able to hold people accountable. You got to be able to make sure that you don't have information leaking. You also want to make sure that you have, like, again, growth in the areas that are really critical to the organization. And that's just kind of how it's worked for years and years and years, right? Well, yeah, I think the analogy that's so good that I heard recently, I think it was actually Jack Dorsey who wrote about it in the same article that you referenced, Paul. Around kind of this model of like the Roman army back in like the 1400s or 400s or whatever it was. The model there where they expanded so far, right? And then they had to have all these different generals in place to be able to actually have communication get all the way back to Rome, right? To then have the generals in charge make these big decisions. And ultimately what you had is, along the way, no one wanted to tell the bad story and no one wanted to say, what went wrong. They all focused on what's right. And by the time it got all the way back to the general of people making decisions, the message had been so diluted at that point that you didn't really know what was going on. And I think as you move into 2026 and the modern business and the way enterprises work, they have thousands of employees in all these different levels of the work structure, right? And the same thing's happening. If the CEO of the company or a senior executive in the company needs an update, what ends up happening? Well, they go to the VP over that area of business, who then they ask them for an update, who then they provision that to one of their directors or managers, and who they then ask their frontline employees to put everything together. And these AI native companies who are starting out that don't have all that in place, they're not even thinking about having this crazy massive org structure like that. What they're building is this whole intelligence layer of how do they get all their information, all their decisions, all their documents, all their call recordings, all their emails, like all their, making sure their Slack messages are connected, and they're building it into this intelligence layer. So then all of a sudden, getting access to that report, or if you need an update on one area of the business, everyone has access to it, not just the CEO or the senior executives, but everybody. And when you do that, all of a sudden now you enable and you empower the whole organization. And everyone is able now to go make very smart decisions based on all of the context. And that is a really scary thing for massive companies because, for years and years and years, it's been this whole model around permissions. And, well, we can't let this thing happen, or we can't, if we give access to everybody, what if this happens, right? Well, I mean, what if you don't? And yeah, it's scary. And I think, with everything with the OpenClaw is a great example. You have this massive, the biggest moment in agentic AI that has really changed everything, right? Because what did it do? It empowered and enabled everyone, regardless of skill, to be able to go in and build out an agent and use it for their everyday work, and everyday, life, even for just as a general assistant. But the only way it really worked well is if they gave it access to all their tools. So big thing that happened with, if you look at when OpenClaw, that kind of that moment happened, and again was a major moment from an agentic AI standpoint related to democratization of everyone's able to now go build their own agent, and they can build it as a personal agent, as helping them, from a business standpoint. Well, compare that to what most companies did, and you had, for the most part, most organizations saying, if like they were doing everything they could to prevent OpenClaw instances from running on their networks and their servers and their environments, which, by the way, I think was probably the right decision given what the alternative was. Like, they couldn't have these agents just running loose in production environments. Like, that would be crazy, right? So at the end of the day, that when you compare that from an AI native company risk level to a enterprise level organization and their risk level, AI native companies can take on way more risks. And what you're finding is, and you're hearing about all the time, is even coding agents. There was a big push of a lot of companies were like actually reworking their code base to make it these monolith apps or code bases, which is, for those who don't know, that's essentially where instead of having different applications and different services that all ultimately work together, that are all like, think of it as individual code bases that make up the full application. But why that works so well is access to information, right? And access to the entire picture. And to make good sound decisions, you have to have the full picture. Like, that's just not here, but like in life, if you only have a piece of the puzzle, only a part of the perspective and part of the context, how in the world could you make the right decision? Well, that's no different when you talk about agents needing full access to be able to do the right thing and make the right decision. That's a very scary thing for a lot of companies and a lot of people. So I think what we're finding is, companies that are aggressively figuring out ways to ingest all of their context, all of their information, and really create this whole knowledge layer and brain of the organization, essentially, that agents can use, that their employees can use, and doing that in a way that does not create, high level or significant risk for especially enterprise companies. I think there's absolutely the case of companies that do these things the right way and take on the DNA and identity of smaller organizations, while having the scale and velocity of being this massive behemoth that has, power within a specific space, relationships to be able to win. And so that, I think, is where if they're the companies that are, or large companies that are taking on those tendencies and trying to act as a smaller company essentially and trying to build these layers and democratize information, I think they're going to win. I think it's going to be very difficult to stop. It's a matter of, can they catch up, and or the other side of it is, can the smaller organizations continue to move at this crazy rapid pace to where they can't get caught, right? And we'll see what happens.
Look, this monolithic architecture discussion really highlights argument, really proves the point. Models that can supervise work need full context. The companies building that unified brain are building an operating layer, not just another tool. Those smaller, agile firms can definitely run faster, but large corps can still win if they get their data together. It's about speed versus full context, and ultimately, full context wins.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. What's next, Paul?
The final topic, one I was not expecting to go over today, was the Pope. And the Pope is in the news. So Pope Leo the 14th, he released his encyclical.
It's definitely interesting.
Magnificent Humanity is what he described it as. And he basically said that AI is really at a crossroads, and it's got to focus on human dignity, labor, power, governance, institutional responsibility, kind of relating back to what the Pope did in 1891, which was the time of the Industrial Revolution, and making sure that human labor rights were being considered, because it was a very exciting time for the world, but also heavy machinery, heavy equipment. A lot of humans were not really being taken for, their labor laws, and the workers were not being considered. A lot of people died, of course, with just what had to be done. The railroads, a lot of people were not looked at as humans almost. And the Pope at that time made a comment, made his encyclical on, this is something we need to be focused on. And this is something that the Pope this year also mentioned and discussed it at length. And Anthropic was at this Vatican also discussing this, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, it's right up their alley.
This is where
they love this.
They're always talking about the Pope and all their models. And they're always shouting out the Vatican in every press release they have. So it makes sense, obviously, for those guys as an AI lab. I mean, it can go a couple ways, right? This looks like it's more of a, symbolic approach on trying to make their brand and their name be more, human rights driven, or focusing on the human aspect. It's more of a PR move, I think, than anything. Again, their IPO is coming out soon. I don't know.
That'd be big.
Focused on different questions about the machine. When AI changes budgets, workflows, and org charts, someone has to define those moral boundaries. And look, if a regulator, auditor, or court asks how that decision was made, only companies that own their stack can answer.
Or you could say that the Pope helped influence the decision. I mean, that's a pretty hard one for regulators to come back on, right?
Yeah, it's hard to push back on the Pope, right?
Yeah, listen, that's actually really interesting about the 1891 precedent. I did not know that. So that's super different or super interesting comparison there. Because again, if you were to look at what the moment we're in now and how big that is, it's probably the most recent close compare we can have. I mean, this is obviously way bigger than the internet, which I know is the other comparison, but this dwarfs that massively. But yeah, again, when I first saw it, I will say I laughed. I immediately thought this is the most anthropic thing I've ever seen.
Point about it being hard to push back on the Pope, this encyclical places AI within a debate about human dignity, labor, power, and governance, something these companies are going to have to deal with. If a regulator or court asks how that decision was made, owning the stack is the only way to answer. You can't rent intelligence and lose the ability to explain your own behavior.
To all the new roles and what type of jobs are being created. And by the way, like I'm with you on what you said before, Paul. I mean, the jobs data shows it. I mean, there's more jobs being created as part of the AI rollout than there is being eliminated. And end of the day, a lot of companies are going to be making these decisions of like there's going to be companies that specialize in it's not. They don't have AI as part of their process. Like it's humans making the decisions. And that's going to be some like part of their value prop. And I think that totally works. By the way, that's no different than, I noticed you have some great watercolors behind you back there, but sure, like the artists who did those, they're phenomenal, by the way. So
Thank you.
Whoever did those, there's a human touch to that. And could those be AI generated? Sure. But is someone buying the AI generated image? Probably not. So same thing. It's going to be like the actual human aspect is going to become extremely valuable. Back to supply and demand. As there becomes a scarcity of human aspects and human touch, that will absolutely increase in value. And the question that companies are going to have to really make is, where do they apply the efficiency gains and the ability to move at an unbelievable rapid pace? And, from a quality aspect, implement things that are, perfect, which is maybe a bad thing in some cases, which sounds odd, but again, when you want a human aspect, like humans are not perfect by any means, and there's a beauty to that. So like the human touch will become so important in different areas of different industries. But, when it comes to security, when it comes to risk, when it comes to like financial decisions, take medical as well, like legal and medical, I think it's going to be really important for companies to pick their lanes, make sure that they have the best possible people overseeing the decisions themselves of what gets made and what companies are optimizing for. For example, this we'll probably talk about it next week, but this whole real huge focus on these recursive learning loops and reinforcement learning and self-improvement that you can now very easily put in place and actually implement. And there's like real world examples of it happening. No real world example yet, I think, of like an entire company doing it like end to end, but absolutely, for specific workflows, specific tasks and functions, you can now do that. So end of the day, if you optimize for the wrong thing and you optimize for like, let's say just profit, right? Man, the models will find a way to do it, but at what cost? And you're going to alienate a lot of customers. You're going to frustrate a lot of people. And that becomes a much bigger issue than I think companies might realize. So having the right people and humans making those decisions, I think is going to be very important. A lot of tough decisions companies are going to have to make it on the horizon. So what better person to have in your corner than the Pope, right? There you go.
The Father, the Son, the Holy.
What a way to end, right?
Okay. Well, that will conclude episode 1. Thank you for joining. We appreciate it. Like and subscribe.
Yes.
Write a comment of what you want us to talk about next. Maybe we'll get to it. Maybe we won't.
We will.
Again, we are not related to the 2000 movie from JT.
But like this on YouTube though, because our goal is to be on page 1 and actually like take down.
We're taking them down. Yeah, they got a lot of fans.
I mean, that's our KPI. Is like we gotta surpass historical rankings. So we need a lot of help to do it.
And maybe
Excited
JT
in-
will come on in a couple weeks. We don't know. We can't predict the future. Thanks, guys.